So, folks, I have promised you a look into the heart of madness within our mainstream political apparatus, and I think no one really embodies this so much as Nate Silver. Now, if you don't know who Nate Silver is, he's basically a guy who was able to do some good predicting, maybe like 10 years ago, maybe. You know, in the pre-Trump era, he rose to prominence for his predictions and statistical analysis. And he tried to leverage this into like a whole company and tried to become like the next great political prognosticator. And then he developed allegedly a gambling problem, and he's kind of lost a step or two, and he's basically just slowly rotting his brain over on Twitter. And well, here he is, just a couple days ago. The Democratic equivalent of the Tea Party is basically Heather Cox Richardsonism, a kind of purity politics rooted in belief in the historical righteousness of the Progressive Project, paired with a loose grasp, if not outright disdain, for the role played by public opinion. Lol, he says, posting an AI image that he's going to use for his article because he decided to go and write an entire ass article about what he calls Richardsonism, which, like, oh my god, I saw this and I knew I had to look up what the hell this is and just go through it with you, because I just think that is very funny. What is Heather Cox Richardsonism? No longer just a Substack, it's one of the three emerging factions of the Democratic Party. And like, what? Okay, look, I know vaguely who Heather Cox Richardson is. I would not describe her as one of the driving factors behind the Democratic factions. I think she does decent work. She's got a YouTube channel with about 700,000 subscribers, right? She's written a few books. She's a political historian, and she makes a lot of videos and does like a lot of content. She interviews various Democratic communicators like Jojo from Jers, Paul Krugman, Zorad Mamdani. But like, I wouldn't necessarily describe her as one of the primary driving forces of the Democratic Party. Now, what I would describe her as is a very successful political communicator who talks about historical trends in politics. I would describe her as a very knowledgeable person about history. I would describe her as emblematic of the kind of person you are going to find at a wide variety of different democratic functions, right? She's, one of those kinds of people who's like your local Democratic chair. Like, she's one of those kinds of people who's out there at the No Kings protests holding her signs at 63 years old. She's like, she's doing good work, but she's by no means unique in that good work, right? Yeah, yes, I would say I wouldn't even compare her to Ezra Klein, Ruthie. She's much better than Ezra Klein in every regard. I think I think she does excellent work. And I would just say that Nate Silver focusing in on her as like the driving force behind a third of the Democratic Party, I don't think that is accurate. I think that is, again, one of those kind of mistaking, missing the forest for the trees type of situations where like she's doing good work. She's out there in front, but like she's not the driving factor behind this whole like force in politics. It's people are genuinely out there fighting for working class folks, fighting for basic rights and representation, fighting for the very idea of democracy, fighting because they believe it is the right thing to do. And like, I don't know, I'm interested. Hey, Nate Silver, what's your analysis? Sounds like Silver is framing Richardson as being bad. Bingo, he is. He thinks that she is a bad and corrosive force in politics, which, no. This is the future liberals want, and honestly, I can't blame them. ChatGPT 5.2. Why is this the what does this mean? Nate, what does that mean? When you say this is the future liberals want, what does that mean, Nate? Why do you think liberals want Joe Biden shaking hands with Abraham Lincoln on the shore of the ocean while a gigantic lobster appears and there's a bear smiling in the background and Heather Cox Richardson is just a gigantic edifice jutting from the rocks next to a sign that says love is love? Why would you think this, Nate? Why would you made this image and then you looked at it and you said, yes, this is liberalism. Why are you doing that? Is this AI sloppy? Yeah, of course it is. Look at the piss filter on it. What are Abe's legs doing? Maybe the lower half of Abraham Lincoln is a lobster. All right, let's take a look. First, it was blue skyism, which, okay, I'm gonna stop you right there, Nate. I'm gonna stop you right there. Anyone who is seriously using the term blue skyism is already so blighted in their own minds. It's crazy. Like, what? The vast majority of people in this country don't know what blue sky is. They don't know what that means, Nate. Most people don't even care about Twitter. Okay, just disqualifying right off the bat, but okay. Now it's Heather Cox Richardsonism? Given the changes to the algorithm, tweets don't really go viral these days unless they fall into one of a few dubious niches. But this one from the weekend sparked a relatively big reaction, both on X and, negatively of course, on Blue Sky. The Democratic equivalent of the Tea Party is basically Heather Cox Richardsonism, a kind of purity politics rooted in a belief in the historical righteousness of the Progressive Project, paired with a loose grasp, if not an outright disdain of the role played by public opinion. Now, just want to really clarify here, the progressive cause is and always has been righteous. Extending what egalitarianism entails to all people of all kinds is an inherently good project. That is that is righteous. The cause of making all people equal under the law, making all people have a right to their self-expression and to do what they will as long as it hurts no one else. These things are inherently righteous. It is good to protect the rights of LGBTQ people to marry. It is good to protect the rights of trans people to exist. It is good to protect, equality under the law, regardless of race, class, color, or creed. It is good. And it is good for us to then look towards the future and say, how can we better the lot of all working people? How can we wake up and build a world that our children will be proud to inherit? These are righteous projects. But let's figure out what Nate Silver thinks is unrighteous about them, I suppose. But Jack, have you ever considered smug contrarianism as an alternative? No. I think it was a good tweet, but there's more behind it than can easily be expressed in 280 characters. So as part of the occasional Silver Bulletin series, Nate's Tweets Explained, let's work our way through it. Bro, if you gotta write an entire essay about your shitty tweet, I hate to be this blunt about it, but instead, have you considered shutting the fuck up? Like, shut the fuck up, log off of Twitter, and like, I don't know, do something nice. Do so, like, go for a walk, pet a dog. I don't know, like, get over yourself. I guess you can play a video game. I don't know. There are a lot of better things to do with your time. Heather Cox Richardson is a historian who earned her PhD at Harvard and who now teaches at Boston College, and one of the most influential political writers in America. HCR's Substack, Letters from an American, had seemed like an unlikely hit when it first spun out of a series of Facebook posts late in Trump's first term, but it has since only grown in influence. It currently ranks number 3 on the US politics bestseller list, by far Substack's most popular category. Although Richardson rarely paywalls posts, these leaderboards are based on paid subscription revenue, meaning that people frequently sign up for a paid sub anyway, out of loyalty to her cause. The only other publications that rank higher in the category, the Free Press and the Bulwark, have dozens of contributors and use Substack as a publishing platform for what are essentially traditional mid-sized newsrooms, to the extent that category still exists in 2025. HCR is much more of a solo operator. Her newsletters, like On Kawara's Paintings, are labeled by the date, e.g. December 12th, 2025, usually arriving in my mailbox around midnight from her home in coastal Maine. While I doubt this was Richardson's intent, this is in some ways an admirable example of American entrepreneurship. She provides allyship to a niche market, older, college-educated normie liberals, especially women. That is, okay, wait, if someone is subscribed to politics writers on Substack, they are not normies. They are politically engaged individuals. All right? The same way, no one who's watching my show right now is like a normie. All due respect to all of you. None of you are normies. Okay? Normies are not engaged actively in politics. You guys are very special and wonderful in your own way. But you need to recognize that specialness in each and every one of you, that special spark, that knowledge that you possess that others lack, which is, again, good. You should be educated. You should be engaged. That's great. But if you're subscribed to one of the leading political thinkers in the country, her Substack, you're not a normie. I'm sorry. It's only sad because it should be the norm, and it's not true, Kippy. True. Abnormies unite. Especially women. That is poorly served by a mainstream media perpetually chasing younger, often male audiences. And furthermore, which has taken a rightward turn under Trump 2.0, increasingly reflecting the political preferences of wealthy owners and publishers. It's safe to assume that HCR is earning millions of dollars per year from Letters from an American. But many people have made orders of magnitude more money by being, for instance, early investors in Bitcoin. So all credit to her success. Nevertheless, it's an interesting cultural and political phenomenon. Nate, Home Slice. Can I call you Home Slice? I'm calling you Home Slice. Home Slice. What a point of comparison. Yeah, she's doing very well compared to Substack, but a lot of people made money off of Bitcoin. What? Why are you talking about Bitcoin? How is that comparable? A lot of people lost a lot of money too. 1,000 flowers are going to bloom in the Substack ecosystem. A fair number of you subscribe to both Silver Bulletin and other authors whom I frequently disagree with, and that's great. I'm not sure how you'd measure this, but I'd guess we'd rank highly in political diversity among comparably sized Substacks. There's almost certainly a wider range of voices represented in the media today than a quarter century ago, when the milquetoast group-thinky centrism Okay. Group-thinky? Group-thinky.
Not gonna lie, if someone call me a normie I will get offended. Like be called a normie is to be an ignorant bold in a mass of other ignorant bolds.
Group-thinky. Olympians, thank you for the $5 dono. Group thinky centrism of shows like Meet the Press tend to drown out all other perspectives except Fox News and right-wing talk radio. In the older days, Richardson probably wouldn't have given the same opportunities, or if she had, she'd be literally somewhat boxed in by TV bookers into speaking towards particular talking points or playing a certain TV-ready role. But while success on Substack genuinely brings a lot of freedom, it also risks audience capture. Okay. It also means that Richardson, however reluctantly, has become a political celebrity, an avatar for something bigger than herself. Having experienced a little of this myself, I think it can put you in an uncomfortable position. You're minding your business, and suddenly you're getting recognized at the grocery store, and hundreds of thousands of people, millions in HCR's case, are hanging on your every word. We're exactly the same, you and I. Nate Silver and Heather Cox Richardson, they're exactly the same. Like peas in a pod. Okay. This is not, by the way, doing a very good job of explaining his tweet. I don't know. I don't know how to if your goal was to explain your tweet, motherfucker, you are not doing that. Since they were dropped from the SAT, let's revisit how analogies work. Okay. So, while I'm empathetic to HCR, she has a very big platform, and I don't think her success is any accident. It reflects the evolution in how a large segment of the Democratic base has reacted to Trump, which a large section of the Democratic base has organically reacted that way due to underlying forces that are not, in fact, controlled by Heather Cox Richardson. All right, but let's go on. And I don't let's get back to that tweet which called Heather Cox Richardsonism the Democratic equivalent of the Tea Party. I'm not saying they're exactly alike. Suppose I tweeted that the European equivalent of New York pizza slices is basically doner kebabs. This is not intended to imply that doner kebabs are a type of pizza or that pizza is a type of sandwich. Rather, they serve some analogous functions as a greasy, tasty, cheap late-night food, typically ordered at a counter and messily consumed somewhere on or near the premises. The contrasts are also interesting. Why are pizza slices in Europe usually kind of shit? Also, okay, since we're learning about analogies here, the Tea Party was fucking insane. I don't know if you guys know or remember the Tea Party. Let me just pull this up here. I don't know. It was a weird time. Obamacare, unconstitutional. Something is brewing. Patriotism. It was crazy. You had old guys wearing tricorn hats. You had guys cosplaying revolutionaries calling for the government to be shut down. You had people carrying Glenn Beck signs saying, Glenn Beck, thank you. I don't know. It was a really weird time. Okay. And I think potentially saying, hey, Democrats protesting Donald Trump are the same as Tea Partiers who were insane and saying that Obamacare was going to result in all of them living in hobbit homes, like Obama was going to just uproot Republican families and put them into holes in the ground. That was one of the mainstream conservative conspiracy theories spread by the Tea Party during this time. Okay? And I don't know, in this circumstance, it's kind of I understand that the comparison is to say, oh, well, this is a politically relevant movement that seeks to shift the Democratic Party. I understand that part of the analogy. The part that doesn't make sense is the comparison to, the Tea Party, which was staffed up by lunatics who believed in conspiracy theories, as opposed to what the Democratic mass movement has been, which has resulted in, I want to remind you guys, the largest civil rights demonstration since the 1960s, possibly in US history. And it kind of seems like comparing that type of movement that has that broad appeal and that motivational power to organize that many folks to the Tea Party is perhaps not, it makes your analogy perhaps shitty, kind of like shit, as it were. But let's keep going. So when I write about the Democratic equivalent of the Tea Party, this analogy implies similarities as well as differences. Differences shaped by the contours of respective demographics of Democrats and Republicans, their relationship with various institutions, and their formative political experiences. I'm hoping to do a part 2 of this that goes through the comparison more explicitly, but that isn't coming out of nowhere. The tweet was basically a spin-off from last week's newsletter about Democrats' increasingly angry mood and how that could lead to some electorally suboptimal choices. Nor is that comparison particularly original. In October, the Ettinger-Mentum newsletter, always a great read, even when I disagree, which I often do. Also, I will second Ettinger-Mentum. I'm not good at saying his name. Writes some good shit. Although he did post something about Crusader Kings 2 that I thought was pretty funny. Let's keep on going. Published a post titled "The Democratic Party's Tea Party Movement Has Begun." It cited some of the same factors that I covered in last week's newsletter, such as the political rise of Jasmine Crockett and Graham Plattner. Also emphasized something else, a disconcerting reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination from a respectable above-board liberal faction, including Richardson, who passed along misinformation about the political identity of the shooter through her 2.7 million person strong email list. But in fact, the alleged shooter was not someone on the left. The alleged killer, Tyler Robinson, is a young white man from a Republican gun enthusiast family who appears to have embraced the far right, disliking Kirk for being insufficiently radical. Rather than grappling with reality, right-wing figures are using Kirk's murder to prop up their fictional world. Briefly, they claimed Richardson had been radicalized in college. Then, when it turned out he had only spent a single semester at a liberal arts college before going to trade school, MAGA pivoted to attack those who allegedly had celebrated Kirk's death on social media. Now, there was a lot of misinformation in the aftermath of this case, but I think that the assertion generally that, like, the conservative narrative largely fell apart was largely because it fell apart. It's why they haven't been talking about him for months. It's why, like, he had his first court appearance the other day and hardly anyone talked about it. The issue that I take with this is that, is there a movement to change the Democratic Party? Yes, there is. Is that movement operating along the same lines the Tea Party did? Abso-fucking-lutely not. But let's continue through this. After having speculated without evidence that Robinson was a groyper who had killed Charlie Kirk for being insufficiently conservative, I do also want to say a point of evidence in favor of the fact that Robinson was a groyper. It does not appear that he was, but the reason people thought he was because Nick Fuentes very clearly thought that the shooter was a groyper. Like, Nick Fuentes, like, straight up went into hiding, went into full-on, like, lockdown mode, because he thought the shooter was one of his guys. And I think that's somewhat telling. But Richardson was proven wrong by subsequent events, but she made no effort to correct the record, and her misleading interpretation traveled widely. There's possibly even a thread between Richardson's newsletter and Jimmy Kimmel getting suspended, for example, after he repeated a similar theory on his show. I agree with Joshua A. Cohen, aka Ettinger-Mentum, that this seems like a revealing moment for Democratic politics. That such an influential person, a history PhD from Harvard who claims to be highly concerned about misinformation, would commit a misinformation misdemeanor of her own. That seems significant. Democrats have had their problems with epistemic bubbles, but this one hit a little differently. The double standard that people have for Democrats versus Republicans is fucking crazy. It's fucking crazy. Especially when talking about the Tea Party. You want to talk about an epistemic bubble? Good God. First of all, like I think that people reasonably, based on information that was available, came to the conclusion that perhaps this guy was a groiper. Now, I still haven't seen definitive evidence that that was true versus not true. I'm interested to see what comes out during the trial, right? Um, I also just want to say that Democrats, because of perhaps one unfounded claim about Charlie Kirk's assassin, are in the like an epistemic bubble crisis, when over on the right they're like Donald Trump is telling his 100 million followers, you know, across the world that like, oh, well, our economy is great. We're making trillions of dollars from tariffs, and tariffs are good because other countries are paying the tariffs. Like the epistemic bubble here for the Republican Party, just on the presence of Trump alone, is astronomical. It's out of this world. They are not even in the same version of reality that we are. And like, I just, yeah, like, yeah, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. Like, Donald Trump was literally out there half-heartedly saying that immigrants were eating people's pets. Like, and Republicans just ran with it. Like, people came out and were like, oh yeah, Donald Trump is the anti-war president. And like, they just ran with it. They're still running with it, even as he does acts of war towards Venezuela. The fucking insanity here is crazy. Now, is it good to report 100% accurate information? Yeah, you should strive to do that. But also, and you should correct yourself when you're wrong. And to the extent that I'll criticize Heather Cox Richardson here, issuing like some kind of correction or like edit after the fact probably warranted. But that's like a pretty, I would argue, small criticism, especially considering that basically Nate Silver exists in his own world of just making crazy batshit claims that he cannot back up with facts. Like that's basically his entire job at this point. But let's continue through. Richardsonism and the three factions of the Democratic Party. I'd argue that there are three main factions of the Democratic Party, as the jockeying is already underway for the 2026 and 2028 primaries. First, there's the capital L left, populist, deservedly feeling recharged by the success of Zoran Mamdani and a backlash to the increasingly political assertive billionaire class. It's an interesting way of phrasing that, but okay. Politically assertive as opposed to fascist authoritarian billionaire class. Okay. Next, there's what you might think of as the abundance libs. Technocratic, more willing to find common ground with Republicans, and more sympathetic to market-based solutions. I'm a big fan of Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, the authors of Abundance, but I think the project is more neoliberal than left-wing. To me, not such a bad thing. That's a subject for a different newsletter, however. We can tell, Nate. We can tell. The neoliberalist stink is all over you. The third faction, Richardsonism, or a term I'll treat as synonymous with it, hashtag resistance libs. They're older, with extremely high educational attainment, predominantly female, and very highly politically engaged. This is the audience for a cluster of political activism encompassing things such as the No Kings protests, and some highly popular anti-Trump substacks, along with certain prominent podcasts and much of Blue Sky. Okay, I'm sorry, but Blue Sky as a faction of the Democratic Party is just so myopically brain poisoned. I can't handle it. I can't handle it. And yeah, no, he keeps coming back to women. My feeling here is that you're not talking like he wants to say, oh, it's resistance libs at large, but he can't stop himself from saying what I think the actual issue is in saying, well, it's a lot of women. It's a lot of women. And like people who are more politically engaged are more likely to go to events like No Kings. They are more likely to seek leadership positions in their local Democratic chapters or local DSA chapters, right? And like, God, I bet he thinks that the what's the name of that show with the Midwestern ladies who yell profanities? What's the name of the show that's run by me in like 20 years? what what's it called? You guys know. It's the I've is it I've had it? The I've had it pod? Is that it? Oh god. I just yeah, I've had it podcast. I'm excited. You're talking Yes, I'm talking about Jennifer Welch. Thank you. I don't watch the show, but I do like them. Jennifer and Pumps, love them. Yeah, they seem really cool. I'd love to go on their show sometime. If any of you are active in their comments, get me on that show, all right? I love how he's well. Look, there's only one show with like two foul-mouthed ladies who are really angry about politics, and I, for one, support that. Okay. All that being said, I'm sure he's thinking of them when he says certain prominent podcasts. Wait, he added a link. I just saw it. Yeah, yeah. Let's go. Let's go. Jennifer Welch, baby. I knew it. I called it. Didn't look at the link. That's on me. Do you collab with other channels? I wouldn't say I collab with other channels, but like I'll go on someone else's show if they invite me. Depending on the show, obviously, but yeah. Basically, his entire idea here is women podcasters who are on the left are their own faction. Nate, what are you doing? Nate, are you a lonely man? Wait, Nate Silver wife. Is he divorced? Is he a divorced man? I don't know, and frankly, I don't care if I can't find that answer within 5 seconds. You could argue for the existence of a fourth faction, the social justice left, aka the woke left, but I'd claim that it's largely been absorbed into the others. Can I just say, this is like the neoliberal version of What If Alt Hist? Can I say that? Am I allowed? Am I allowed to make the comparison here that I feel in my heart? Wait, Nate Silver is gay? Oh no. Oh honey. He's never been married? Okay. Yeah, no, like I'm sorry. He's just like, yeah, I'm gonna fabricate these factions out of the ether. There are only really two factions within the Democratic Party. Okay, are you guys ready? There are progressives and there are centrists. That's it. That's it. And the centrists are basically just conservatives. They want to conserve the status quo. And like the progressives want to push to the left. And to the extent that they want to push to the left, debatable. Obviously, Bernie Sanders is an out-and-out socialist, but not every progressive is a socialist. There is, in fact, a lot of difference between someone who is simply a progressive in Congress and an out-and-out socialist in Congress. But be that as it may, progressives still want to make things, by and large, better than what the status quo provides us. And the idea that you have like a secret third faction that's like what people do on Blue Sky, I'm sorry, it is that's just like a crazy fan fiction you write because you are brain poisoned by Twitter. Didn't he have squiggly maps with 538? Nate Silver was the guy who did 538 before it got bought out by ABC, I think. But we're not even through this yet. If you're a longtime reader of Silver Bulletin, you'll know that it's the Resistance Libs whom I clash with the most. Partly that's a matter of taste. I'm not going to lie, I find them kind of cringe, but it's also because I think they have the worst political instincts of the three groups. For instance, in their infatuation with Gavin Newsom and their steadfast defenses of Joe Biden's decision to run for re-election, I okay, this is why it's not real. This is why what you're talking about isn't real. Because the progressive faction, right? Well, one, the progressive faction isn't queuing up behind Joe Biden and isn't queuing up behind Gavin Newsom. As far as I know, I don't know much about the I've Had It crew. I don't know much about Heather Cox Richardson. My understanding is that they are not pro Gavin Newsom. And I think the first people in line to say Joe Biden, like fuck Joe Biden, would probably be Jennifer Welch. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. If you guys, I'm sure some of you guys watch the show a lot more than I do. Let me know if I'm wrong, okay? The people who are in favor of Gavin Newsom are the abundance liberals. Like, they're like, that's why Ezra Klein literally just had Gavin Newsom on his podcast. Because again, the abundance liberals are just the conservative faction of the party. Newsom, throw trans people under the bus, progressives, yeah. It's also because I sometimes find them hypocritical. What purport to be principled defensives of democracy are often just defenses of the Democratic Party. But whatever you call this faction, the hashtag resistance or no kings or Richardsonism, again, the fact that you're trying to lump three things together here, which are insane, right? You have resistance, hashtag resistance libs, which to me are like people online who are like doing follow for follow bullshit with like blue waves in like their channel handle on Blue Sky or Twitter or what have you, and just are posting. They're posting through it, or they're bots, and I can't really tell which is which. The No Kings protests, I want to say again, are the biggest organizational like push in politics of the modern era. Like the Tea Party at most was like a couple thousand people, maybe. No Kings constituted millions of people coordinating their action. I think one must identify it as a distinctive thing. Richardsonism often clashes with the abundance libs. Well, okay, wait, you haven't described what Richardsonism is. Like, Richardsonism makes it sound like it's an ideology. Like, what is the ideology of Richardsonism? If you're just using it in the place of resistance libs, that's not an ideology. It's not an ism. Why did you just you came up with a different label for something that already had a label for no reason other than to associate it with Heather Cox Richardson, which is weird. But it also doesn't always vibe with the capital L left. There's not a lot of economic populism, for instance. Take a look at this field survey of No Kings protesters published by Axios. What are their top issues? Trump, immigration, politics, voting, federal workforce reduction, funding freeze, racial justice, systemic racism, social welfare, including healthcare, LGBTQ rights, income and wealth inequality, women's rights, reproductive rights, climate change / environment, war in Gaza, gun control, peace, labor, religion. There's King Trump himself on top, of course, but immigration rated considerably more highly among protesters than healthcare or social welfare, in contrast to the general public's greater interest in economic issues. Among the broader electorate, most voters citing immigration as their number one issue are Republican-leaning. According to the AP VoteCast exit poll, they chose Trump over Harris by an 88-10 margin last year, while the No Kings voters are anything but that. Nate, because it's because we disagree. It's because we disagree on the immigration issues. It's because during the No Kings protests, Donald Trump was deploying ICE agents across the country, masked ICE agents, rounding up people who had done nothing wrong. Rounding up US citizens, disappearing people off the street for like opinion columns they published in their student papers. It's because people actually give a damn about freedom, Nate. When Republicans list immigration as their top issue, it's because they they believe, they bought the fear-mongering lies about immigrants, that immigrants are taking the jobs, and they want them gone. And when Democrats at a No Kings protest list immigration as their top issue, it's not because they agree with the Republicans, Nate. This is, again, garbage brain. There are also some echoes of wokeness on the No Kings priority list. Racial justice / systemic racism rated more highly than income and wealth inequality among the No Kings crowd, and LGBTQ plus rights on par with it. Yeah, because what's under attack right now by the Trump administration is an intensifying focus by the Trump administration on exacerbating racial justice issues, on destroying the issues that, on destroying the policies that help and support non-white people in this country, attacking the fundamental rights queer people have fought for decades. Like, yeah, people really want to address that, but they also know that, like, Donald Trump and the Republicans aren't going to do anything about wealth inequality because it's the one issue where they are all on the same page, which is to make it more unequal in favor of Republican donors. God, I'm stumbling over my words because I'm just so upset. This is so stupid. God. What are abundance Democrats? Oh, my name is Mud. The only thing you need to know about abundance Democrats are that it comes from a book written by Ezra Klein and his friend, I forget what his name is, Derek Thompson, where they argue that basically what Democrats need to do in order to solve problems like housing is to just get rid of regulations. It's literally just, well, their argument is literally, well, let's get rid of, clean air regulations so that we can build apartment buildings in places that, have more poisoned air. That's where we'll build the low-income housing. It's just neoliberalism repackaged. It's just, hey, let's build really cheap, affordable housing on the toxic waste site. And sure, people who live there will get cancer 20 years earlier than their peers, but that's fine because we need the housing now. It's just bullshit Reaganite garbage repackaged for conservative Democrats. And when he says abundance Democrats, he means the Democrats who co-sign Ezra Klein's book. Also, there is no natural inclination towards abundance liberalism except from the most conservative corners of the party. In fact, some of the best critiques of Richardson have come from writers like Cohen and Nathan J. Robinson, who are well to my left. Here's Robinson in a 2023 review of Richardson's book, Democracy Awakening. Essentially, Richardson seems to believe that there is a war between democracy, good, and autocracy, bad, and that the forces of democracy are represented by the Democratic Party, while the Republican Party are bigots, thugs, and would-be dictators. And while I wouldn't quibble with any part of that description of the Republicans, I think Richardson is not nearly critical enough of the Democratic Party, which appears in her story almost entirely innocent and wholly devoted to the well-being of the American people. My own belief is different. I think until we recognize the failures by the Democratic Party helped to bring us Donald Trump, we cannot shore up the country against the authoritarian threat that Richardson and I are both alarmed by. And I 100% agree with Robinson's quote there. Like, I don't know to what extent it accurately captures the spirit of Heather Cox Richardson's work. I haven't been watching her content. Maybe I should go over some of her videos. Suffice it to say, yeah, the Democrats have been fucked up. Like, the billionaire class has captured many people in the Democratic Party and dictate policy that the Democratic Party then regurgitates. I don't know that actually captures her sentiment on the issue, though. It could be that her book that was published 2 years ago doesn't reflect her views today. Or it could be that she just didn't go into enough detail about her criticisms of the Democratic Party. I don't know. I don't agree with Nathan Robinson on much, but I'd endorse almost every word of this. There's no shortage of reasons I feel legitimate outrage about Trump. From January 6th to tariffs to disrespect for the rule of law to cronyism to gutting the CDC to even simple meanness, like his Truth Social post yesterday that attributed the tragic murder of actor Rob Reiner and his wife to Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, let's be clear, that is more than simple meanness. It's fucking psychotic. It's a symptom of his brain dying from oxygen loss. Where I find common ground with Robinson is in being skeptical that Richardsonism is helping the pro-democracy cause as much as it claims to. Okay, but also, here's the issue. You wrote this article ostensibly to critique Heather Cox Richardson, but then you're trying to elaborate it into some kind of grand class distinction or grand faction distinction. But then you keep going back to like her book or like one of her Substacks, and like, I don't know that her book is emblematic of how millions of people feel. I don't know. Like, let me put it this way. Heather Cox Richardson might be relatively influential, but the Majority Report has like another 1.5 million listeners every day. Does that mean that there's a faction of the Democratic Party that's majority reporters? Should we call a faction of the Democratic Party the Cedarites? What if every single podcast just got their own political faction? This type of analysis is stupid, Nate. I feel like I shouldn't have to elaborate with this example, but here we are. This is brain poison. Does he even read her Substack? It sounded like he asked ChatGPT about her because he was mad at her tweet. She's critical of the Dems. She constantly talks about how they're not a real opposition party, and historically that's very bad. Okay, so like he's just full of shit. Okay. Thank you, Amber Brains. That actually makes a whole lot of sense. Cool. Oh god, oh god, oh god, he's using this as an opportunity to like air his Twitter grievances. Fuck me. Alright, okay. Robinson and I both have a low opinion of the political efficacy of the Democratic Party establishment, even if we'd undoubtedly recommend different sets of course corrections to it. But the Richardson wing of the party is as pro-establishment as it gets. Richardson twice interviewed Biden, and there was no pretense of journalistic distance. Mr. President, it's such a joy to be with you here in this historic room on this historic day with a historic president, began her 2022 interview. Nor were there any questions about the war in Ukraine, even though Russia had invaded just a day earlier. Purity politics and Richardson's aversion to self-reflection. Indeed, while both the capital L left and the abundance libs do their fair share of self-critique, it's conspicuously lacking from the Richardsonists. This, again, I cannot stress enough, this really, really reeks of guy got butt mad on Twitter and is trying to legitimize it through his work. Like, that's what this is. Oh, God. Is our faction the Jackers? Yes. That is correct.
Her understanding of the left is a bit lackluster, and she's very heavy on descriptive and light on prescriptive. She's my lib mom's favorite political author.
Well, and I think that, like, there is room for building up a descriptive understanding of the Democratic Party, because most people start with absolutely no knowledge about that. You know, like, what is the political landscape? And I feel like as a historian, like, because again, her background is political history, that makes sense. It makes sense for her to be describing the historical like scenarios and how we kind of wound up here. That makes sense. And I would argue that, you know, if we're going to be political commentators, let us be political commentators. Let us advocate for more action. But like, there's certainly room for people who are just out there to inform folks. And like, I don't know. I heard she's a Richardsonist. You're right. You're so right. I forgot. Purity politics and Richardsonism's aversion to self-reflection. Okay, it's conspicuously lacking from the Richardsonists. In fact, the hashtag resistance libs often reject any attempt to even characterize their approach to politics. Oh god, we're getting to Jamel Bowie. I'm fascinated by how Nate Silver turns everything he doesn't like into a bespoke ideology. It's not that he is annoyed by HCR, it's that she is a dreaded ism responsible for everything he doesn't like about the Democratic Party. Same with Blue Sky. Fuck. Look, okay, I like Jamel Bowie a lot. Like I think that man very rarely misses. I've enjoyed his takes, and on this one, he nailed a fucking bullseye. Why is he posting his L's? He's posting his L's to try and recontextualize why all of his haters are wrong. That's he's trying to do it. Yes, as New York Times Jamel Bowie points out, I'm fond of my little categories and isms. Blue Skyism shares some attributes with Richardsonism, such as a reverence for academics, although they're not exactly identical. Blue Sky has a mean streak that is very much not shared by the kinder, gentler Richardson, for instance. I can't. I can't. Oh my god. Yeah, guys, for the love of God, just for a moment, I want you all to understand that for me, exposing myself to this level of Nate Silver content is like drinking just liquefied lead. I'm feeling the poison slowly spread through my body. My cognitive functions slowly begin to shut down. My hair starting to fall out. I'm I'm dying. He's such a mean girl. Oh god, he really is. Fuck. Also, Sake Tanuki, I forget if I said thank you, but thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. I very much appreciate the support. And thank you for the additional 2 tier 1 subs.
He's posting his L's because Nate couldn't post W's from 2000 to 2008, when she could.
I just... This paragraph... I'm sorry, this paragraph is everything wrong with Nate Silver in a nutshell. Like, yes, I'm fond of making shit the fuck up. Let me refer back to this other thing I made the fuck up. Blue Skyism. This is exactly, again, I want to reiterate, this is exactly what if alt hissed, but if he was a neoliberal. This is just some crazy energy. God. Well, you're welcome to disagree. I think these anthropological explorations of the Democratic Party are one of the better beats we have going at Silver Bulletin. He even refers to what he does as anthropology. Oh my god, this pretentious little loser. Oh god. Oh god. Furthermore, I think I can offer an interesting vantage point, being fairly liberal myself, but having backed into politics in a weird way, such that I've always felt like an outsider to the field. I also think these distinctions help explain both some of the seeming contradictions you're seeing in the Democratic Party today, and where it might turn next. The left has some 2028 frontrunners like AOC. The Abundance Libs have Pete Buttigieg and Josh Shapiro, among others. For the resistance libs, despite sometimes styling themselves as contrarian, the top candidate is Newsom, or perhaps even Harris again, who's reportedly leaning towards another presidential run. Please, for the love of God, no. Please, no. No. Just no. No. No and no. Also, I don't think resistance libs actually like Gavin Newsom. I think that, like, what the hashtag resistance libs that you see on Twitter and Blue Sky like is that Gavin Newsom's Twitter account tells Donald Trump to fuck off. And honestly, I think they would gravitate towards any public figure that tells Donald Trump to fuck off. I don't think that they are ideologically at all committed to Gavin Newsom. I think most find him odious. Yeah, maybe him and RFK are sharing the brainworm now. Okay? The podcaster Jennifer Welch was just hailed in a New York Times headline as the Democrats' toughest critic, but she recently hosted a book party for Harris, which wouldn't seem to represent a particularly critical position. The aversion to course correction reflects what I think of as purity politics. We are the good voters, the righteous ones, not like those racist, fascist, neo-Confederate, and/or Christian ethno-nationalist MAGA types. How would you even dare to criticize us? Well, look, it's fine to criticize someone on the left. That's fine. I do it all the time. But let's not pretend that like the politics beef you have with a liberal is anywhere near the kind of political beef you have with an out and out fascist KKK ass movement like the MAGA movement. Okay? It's just not the same kind of beef, man. Don't you guys go coining new isms in my chat? Stop it. Stop it with the Rudyardism. No, I refuse. Beef Torkunk, hello! Haven't seen you in a while. The sense of being on the right side of history is compounded by two other factors that make Richardsonism resistant to criticism. One is the success of the business model. It's hard to change lanes when you're constantly getting positive reinforcement in the form of likes and subscribers. By the way, folks, remember to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Comment longer than 8 words. Apparently the algorithm likes that. And also like it and subscribe to the stream because I desperately need you to reinforce my ego. If you don't subscribe, my entire sense of self will dissolve into nothingness. I will be but a sad pile of dregs within which some shred of humanity remains. Simply scooching along, doing my best. So please support my ego. What the fuck was that? Where did that come from? Who am I? God. You guys, thank you for watching my channel. Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs.
When my biggest complaint with HCR is, that was disappointingly light, and my smallest complaint with Nate's liver is, what the fork did you do to that pole?
Well, like, I don't know. It just kind of seems like Nate Silver is just completely off the rails. Like, Nate Silver is like, you know, like other people are doing actual politics, and meanwhile, Nate Silver is off in the woods doing his best Star Wars kid impression. That's a really old meme. That joke and reference was for all of you olds. And if you're too young, it's fine. You don't need to know what that meant. It's because we all took Tylenol. Nailed it. The other factor is to claim academic expertise, which is highly persuasive to Democrats who are rightly concerned about Trump's war on elite higher education and the anti-scientific turn among people like RFK Jr. Still, this risks making voters easy marks for anyone with a PhD in their bio. That's always been the case. Anyone with an education in a field is more likely to be listened to when topics about that field are brought up. The PhD represents the expertise, you know, supposedly, to the best of our ability. Richardson cites sources at the end of each edition of Letters from an American rather than providing links throughout her posts. This makes them seem more scholarly, but it obscures the fact that her sources are often just random partisans on Blue Sky or Twitter. I'm confident that Richardson's citations for claims about American history are often rigorous. But when it comes to analysis of modern electoral politics, i.e. my area of expertise, what? Okay, Nate. Buddy. Pal. I'm gonna need you to cite your expertise in modern politics. I need some citation on that one. God. She often cherry picks from the most unreliable sources. I'm sorry, wait. The polls were fine this year. Okay. Why did you link to this? Oh my god. Wait. Take Heather Cox Richardson, the Boston College history professor and the Substack GOAT, as in greatest of all time. She has the incredibly popular newsletter that I subscribe to. Richardson doesn't purport to be a polling expert or a data maven, but I read her because she often has smart, slightly offbeat things to say, because she's an articulate and reliable benchmark for a certain worldview that's popular in progressive spaces. Not terminally online like younger progressives, but wiser academic knowing. Here's what she wrote on November 6th once the results were in. The results were a surprise to everyone. Trump is a 78-year-old convicted felon who's been liable for sexual assault and is currently under indictment in a number of jurisdictions. He refused to leave office peacefully when voters elected Joe Biden president in 2020, instead launching an unprecedented attack on the U.S. Capitol to stop the counting of electoral votes, and said during his campaign that he would be a dictator on his first day in office. Pollsters thought the race would be very close, but showed increasing momentum for Harris, and Harris's team expressed confidence during the day, but by posting on social media with no evidence that the voting in Pennsylvania was rigged.
Else the dono ghost will eat Jack's bones.
Matt, that's Yahoo!
Show your support for the ideology Marxism Jackism BWA.
True! Thank you for supporting Marxism Jackism, also known as socialism. Okay? In 2024, it appears the majority of American voters chose to put Trump back in office. The results were a surprise to everyone. They shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone, actually, provided they were reading Silver Bulletin or other nonpartisan polling analysis or mainstream outlets like The Times, and certainly not if they were consuming any right-wing media. And it wasn't just that the polls had been close. Trump had already been elected president before. Okay, so I'm increasingly getting the idea that this man just has a hate boner for Heather Cox Richardson in particular. Also, that doesn't seem to be a link about Heather Cox Richardson using unreliable sources. That seems to be her not reading you. Like, I'm sorry. That's also, can I just say, polling data is a data point. There are many different polls and different ways to aggregate the polling data. But, like, if someone is a Heather Cox Richardson, for example, and says they think that Harris is gonna win, like, that isn't her using unreliable sources.
Hang up over Cox.
It's all in the name, Sake Tanuki. He sees Cox and he goes deranged. It's just how it is. Okay, are we? Yes, we're back here. She's also frequently more partisan than principled. Joe Biden got a complete pass in Richardson's world for pardoning his son Hunter. And while she spread misinformation about Kirk's killer, she wrote highly sympathetically about Luigi Mangione after he assassinated a healthcare CEO. Your Honor. Propaganda. Your Honor. Your Honor. Your Honor. Stop. Your Honor. It's hard to find even the most perfunctory attempts at appeals to higher principles in Richardson's writing when they involve questionable choices made by Democrats. Wait, what is Nate Silver's version of highly questionable? Going to Pirate Wires? I have never heard of this website before. Something happened to Richardson's ability to look at the internet since then, because on September 13th, far from grappling with those who allegedly had celebrated Kirk's death on social media, as she put it, Richardson wrote that Republicans were attacking these folks to create a narrative and mobilize violence against their enemies, a tactic suggested by Nazi political theorist Carl Schmitt because they're losing. Well, to be completely fair to Heather Cox Richardson, a lot of MAGA folks literally called Charlie Kirk's assassination their version of the Reichstag fire. And we're not talking about like random posters on the internet. We're talking like members of the Republican Party or members of political think tanks for the Republican Party. Okay, so like basically, again, I'm coming into this not having a bone like a dog in this fight. I don't know much about Heather Cox Richardson, but I do know that Nate Silver's full of shit. And so it's really interesting that every single time Nate Silver's like, oh yes, look at how sympathetically she wrote about Luigi Mangione. And then I look at the article and it's like, oh, and then I get to a link to Heather Cox Richardson's work and I click on it and it's just going over the history of like political assassinations of powerful, rich, out of touch assholes and the issues that might motivate one to take action against a health insurance company that is reaping hundreds of billions of dollars in profit at the expense of poor, marginalized folks who can't get by, that doesn't read to me as sympathetic towards the murder. It just seems to me as a contextualization of the murder. Furthermore, it's common to read things from Richardson that edge up against the definition of propaganda. Here, for example, was Richardson's take the night after Biden's disastrous debate with Trump last June. Tonight was the first debate between Joe Biden and the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, Donald Trump, and by far the most striking thing about the debate was the overwhelming focus among pundits immediately afterwards about Biden's appearance and soft, hoarse voice. As he rattled off statistics and events, virtually unmentioned was the fact that Trump lied and rambled incoherently, ignored questions to say whatever he wanted, refused to acknowledge the events of January 6th, and refused to commit to accepting the result of the 2024 presidential election, finally saying he would accept it only if it met his standards for fairness. Immediately after the debate, there were calls for Biden to drop out of the race, but aside from the fact that only time as presidential candidate has ever done that, in 1968, it threw the race into utter confusion and the president's party lost. Biden needed to demonstrate that his mental capacity is strong in order to push back on the Republicans' insistence that he was incapable of being president. That he did thoroughly. Biden began with a weak start, but hit his stride as the evening wore on. Indeed, he covered his bases too thoroughly, listing the many accomplishments of his administration in such a hurry that he was sometimes hard to understand. And okay, I will say that is some over the top glazing of Joe Biden. Okay, that's fucking crazy. But also, she is correct that there was a huge focus on Joe Biden being old and not nearly any focus, as much focus at the very least, as on Trump just lying nonstop. Yeah, Heather Cox Richardson is relatively liberal with critiques of the Democratic Party. I would say she seems to me like she's relatively, leans left as a liberal, not fully on board with the centrists, but yeah, this was pretty par for the course for a lot of folks who were hopeful about the 2024 race, unfortunately. We finally beat Medicare. Later in the post, Richardson claimed that different polls gave the win to each of Trump and Biden, which is another little nugget of misinformation. Every scientific poll showed Biden as the clear loser. Democracy requires walking and chewing gum at the same time. More common than outright misinformation from HCR, though, are explanations of his electoral phenomena that don't align with the bulk of the evidence or the consensus of experts who study elections for a living. Here, for instance, is Richardson's dispatch from November 6, 2024, the day after Harris's loss last year, which we already read earlier this stream. It's trite to invoke the apocryphal Pauline Kael line about not knowing anybody who voted for Richard Nixon and therefore being surprised by his win. But even if Richardson herself was shocked by Trump's victory, what sort of epistemic bubble is she living in if she claims the results were a surprise to everyone? Again, the hyperfixation here on her being trapped in an epistemic bubble, as opposed to, again, the lies being routinely told by the right is insane to me. But okay. All right. Trump won before in 2016, and this time around, while the polls weren't fantastically accurate, they showed as close to a toss-up as you can get. The final silver bulletin forecast was literally almost 50-50. Should Richardson stay in her lane and only focus on history, not contemporary electoral politics? No, I'm not asking for that at all, but if you're going to send out missives about electoral politics to 2 million subscribers, you probably ought to do the reading about the many reasons that a Trump win was, at a minimum, highly plausible. Richardson, in her post-election newsletter, made almost no mention of immigration, for example, even though border crossings spiked after Biden adopted lax policies, despite frequent warnings from more moderate Democrats about the electoral downside. Again, border crossings are functionally irrelevant to any kind of conversation about immigration. It doesn't matter. It genuinely doesn't matter. There could be 10 undocumented immigrants coming into the country. Republicans would still think it is one of the top issues facing our nation. Like, it could be a laughably small number and they would still hyperfixate on it. Because the propaganda of the Republican Party has taught them to do that. The idea that, he's like, well, she didn't even know that the numbers sparked. They went up. Who gives a shit? The argument isn't, undocumented immigration went up, and that's bad. No, the argument is we should have a pathway to citizenship. The argument is immigration is a net good, a net benefit to all of us. It raises wages. It for like every single demographic. We get to do more work. It contributes more value to the economy. It helps keep local dollars local. It does so many good things. And like that's what the argument should be. And instead, Nate Silver's like, did you know that immigration went up and people don't like when immigration goes up? It's like, well, the entire purpose of being a politician or a political communicator is to potentially change what people think is good or bad. That's the point. What did she blame Harris's loss on instead? She does attribute some of it to inflation, along with racism and sexism, but the linchpin was disinformation. Richardson even dropped a reference to Russian political theorists and later cites the example of right-wing influencer Benny Johnson, previously funded by Russia, and also funded by Russia recently. So there are echoes of 2016 there, even though she isn't going full Russiagate. Again, we know that a number of political influencers like Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, etc., were literally taking like millions of dollars from Russia in order to make propaganda videos. We know that. That is confirmed. Attributing Democrats' losses to unfair media coverage, but we've covered the big cope extensively before, including in last week's post, so I won't dwell on it here. Richardson at least attributes more of it to Fox News and less to, say, the New York Times, which is the better version of the case. Still, she deprives voters of having any agency. If you voted for Trump, you must have been duped. But how does Richardson account for her own surprise about the outcome? Well, yeah, if you voted for Trump thinking he was going to bring down prices, you were duped. If you voted for Trump thinking that he was going to lower income inequality, you were duped. If you voted for Trump thinking that he was going to like make America great, you were duped. If you voted for Trump thinking he was going to stabilize geopolitics and like be not engage in like foreign war or acts of aggression, you were duped. Like if you were like at all thinking that this guy was going to like improve your life, you were duped, unless you were like one of the billionaires of this country. Most people aren't billionaires. Most people were duped. This keeps going on. It does. It keeps going on. I told you, we were visiting the pits of insanity today. Is it duped if it was voluntary ignorance? I would argue yes, because the reason it's voluntary is largely,
I got abandoned for getting things wrong, but look, she got things wrong and still has more subs than I do.
It really comes across as like a baby whining. Like, oh God, for the love of God, shut the fuck up, Nate. Also, Sake Tanuki, thank you for the 2 tier 1 subs. Thank you for supporting the show. Yeah, if you thought he was only going to deport the worst of the worst, you were duped. If you thought he was going to supercharge small business in America, you were duped. And like, there are some people who didn't vote along those lines because, they're white nationalists and they thought like, get rid of all the brown people. They have not been duped. There are some people who are getting exactly what they wanted, but the people who thought like the egg prices were going to go down and like, food would be affordable again. No. Duped. Like, the reason we talk about media bubbles. Okay, first of all, I just recalled, one of the things he wrote about 100 paragraphs ago. Remember when he accused Heather Cox Richardson of existing within an epistemic bubble, but then can't conceive that Republican voters might also exist within an epistemic bubble? Isn't that kind of weird? I feel like that, more than anything else so far, really betrays the hate boner he has for this woman. Richardson clearly reads widely, so she must be aware that many people pointed out the error in her assumptions about Kirk's assassin. How does she explain her own role in spreading misinformation? Does she think that Tyler Robinson actually was a groyper? I mean, she might. There's literally no evidence that Tyler Robinson wasn't. I think that there is some evidence that indicates he might possibly have been, but we don't know. And I guess we'll find out during the trial. If it was inadvertent, she read something from a trusted source that turned out to be wrong, she ought to have corrected the record. Or is there a sort of utilitarian calculation here? Because Richardson views Trump as an existential threat to democracy, does that mean she sees her role as more that of a political operative? Operatives are never held to high standards of accuracy in the first place. And last, an academic operating at arm's length? She's well within her rights to do that, I suppose. Lots of prominent liberals, including Klein, for example, navigate a boundary between being a commentator and a player in the system. Nonetheless, Richardson's scholarly detached tone masks what is sometimes partisan cheerleading. So he's tone policing her. I've also noticed we've moved away from like her ideology or turning her into an ideology and into just being butt mad about her specifically. Moreover, democracy requires living with an electorate where many voters are misinformed or otherwise exhibit deplorable characteristics. So here's my challenge to Richardson and other hashtag resistance libs. Name one prominent electoral issue on which your personal view of what's right might nevertheless harm Democrats in their effort to win elections. One of mine is immigration. I'm an unabashed lib on this. To the left of probably 85% of the country. I favor enforcement at the border, but I'd like to see much higher levels of legal immigration. Maybe not 1 billion Americans, but perhaps double or triple the current quotas. That is not a far left position. This isn't as unpopular as you might think. Nevertheless, if I were advising a Democratic candidate, I wouldn't advocate for them to propose the Nate let's triple immigration plan. By a 44 to 35 margin, voters still trust Republicans more than Democrats in immigration. Trump's approval rating on immigration is a net negative 5. Not great, but considerably better than his overall numbers. What I'm suggesting here is something that ought to be pretty basic. In a democracy, you need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, keeping in mind that your political preferences might not match those of the median voter. Also, one should keep in mind that the median voter is dumb as bricks. Like, I'm sorry, but in order to understand politics, you need to understand that the median voter doesn't exist. Because by virtue of participating in politics and seeking to influence politics in general, right, you shift who the median voter is. When you push left on an issue, that shifts where the median voter is. And I feel like I shouldn't have to explain that to Nate fucking Silver. Like, my God. He talks about the median voter like it's some goddamn North Star. It's Polaris. It'll lead us home. Like, no, shut the fuck up, Nate. Prioritization is also consideration in an attention economy where voters have limited bandwidth. That doesn't mean that you always want to roll over your political capital into the next election. Sometimes you want to cash your chips in for a win. Democrats paid a high political price for Obamacare, for instance, but now millions more Americans have health insurance. So when people like Bowie write that, quote, what substantively seems to annoy Nate the Silver is the existence of people with principles, they're getting it wrong. No, what annoys me is people like Richardson or Bowie who don't understand the is-ought distinction between the world they think ought to exist, where Biden won a commanding re-election victory and Trump is in jail, and the messy political world that we're really living in. But like Nate Silver's understanding of messy political world is constant like reference to current polling. And the issue with that is that polling, as Nate knows, changes all the time based on events transpiring, political messaging being dispersed, etc. What the median voter thinks changes all the goddamn time. And when we're talking about an election and we're talking about like people advocating for what they want to do when they get into office, then the political candidate gets to get up there, say their piece, and change minds. It isn't the political candidate's job to go out there and regurgitate what the median voter thinks. Because if that were the case, our presidents would be saying dumber and dumber shit over time. And we don't want that to happen. What we want are people with actual principles coming in and advocating them with their chest. full-throatedly with all their heart, because that type of sincerity, you can't pay for that. And that moves people. When you actually show that you give a damn, that changes hearts and minds. And that is the entire point of people getting involved in politics. When folks start getting so obsessed with like trying to means test their own political positions, it weakens them. It makes them less sincere. It embodies everything that people hate about politicians. And so when Nate Silver here writes, "Oh, yeah, let's just look, you need to pay attention to what actually is out there." I'm pretty sure Jamel Bowie knows what's out there. I'm pretty sure Heather Cox Richardson has a good idea of what's going on right now, right? Like, the entire point is to see what is and then push for what should be. And like, I don't feel like that is a particularly novel approach to politics. Is this what it's called, popularism? I mean, popularism is basically just deferring to what set of policies at any given time are the most popular. Right? And Nate Silver is basically advocating for some version of that. This poll says 79% of people say immigration is good, actually. Indeed. And that swing in people's perception of immigration as good or bad is, and you see it every single election cycle. You see it every single election cycle. The reason people start thinking worse about immigrants and worse about immigration is because of the propaganda that is put out by Republicans and Republican campaigns during election season. That's it. But who at the same time are not particularly principled when it comes to recognizing bad behavior on their own side, and who have other poor epistemic habits, including... Also, I'm pretty sure Jamel Bowie calls out Democrats all the time. That of the two, I'm most familiar with Bowie, and his entire thing is advocating for progressive politics and criticizing Dems and Republicans alike. I'd have more admiration for Richardsonism if it were either ruthlessly effective at politics or meticulously clear-eyed and consistent about its principles. It often winds up somewhere in between, squaring the circle with garden-variety Democratic Party partisanship. But that's normal. It's usually what happens to political movements in a two-party system, and Richardsonism is coalescing into something more than a merely very popular substack. Whatever you call it, it ought to be treated, like abundance or the tech right, as one of the winning political movements of the past several years. That means it deserves to be analyzed, criticized, mocked, and celebrated, as any significant political movement is, and treated as harnessing a political gravity of its own rather than just rolling with the evening tides on the main seashore. And we finally are fucking done with this. Jesus Christ. Anyway, I mentioned Nate Silver offhandedly the other day, and this came across my feed, and I read it, and I just want to say, if you didn't understand what I meant when I said Nate Silver is cooked, and Nate Silver is has really fallen off and gotten weird, this is exactly what I mean. Like, this was an insane level of cope from someone who used to be highly respected among liberal Democrats. It is insane to see this. This would be like checking in on Joe Biden and seeing that he was just covered in charcoal ash in his undies, just sobbing in a room somewhere. It just bizarre, off-putting, weird behavior that indicates something is really wrong. Yeah, he cooked as hell. He went hollow. Yeah. Fuck. Anyway, we did it. We made it through. And that took forever and a day. I also have to be honest, I forgot how long this article was. And this drained the soul out of me. That being said, finally we leave the Torment Nexus, indeed. So if you got anything out of this, please, for the love of God, hit the like button. Leave a comment that's longer than 8 words. The algorithm loves comments that are longer than 8 words. And also, please subscribe, because my ego needs to survive. And according to Nate Silver, if you don't like and subscribe, I could perish. So do those things. Also, turn knowing good politics into action. Please, please. Join your local Dems and radicalize them. Join your local DSA and make it more effective. Organize. 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 If you need help doing it, this community will help you. Join the Discord. Reach out to Dragonfly for help organizing your local Dems and radicalizing them. Reach out to GamerG for help organizing your local DSA and making them more effective. And let's make it happen. And last but certainly not least, check out ImogeneOlivia.com. Gender euphoric lingerie designed from the ground up for trans femmes. We've tested it with cis men, cis women, non-binary folks, and the reviews are stellar. So please check it out. And with that, let's keep on going.
Riverboat Jack is going to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube is where she streams. All that content is bursting the seams. Politics, gaming, plenty more. Her sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord. Riverboat Jack.